Hi students, let's talk about the gap model of service quality which is in the subject service marketing. So we'll talk about the different gaps that arise in a service such as knowledge gap, policy gap, delivery gap, communication gap and perception gap. Gap means here any deficiency in the service. When the service provider is not providing the service as per the customer's requirements, it gives rise to different types of gaps. So, this is the gap model of service quality, which explains mainly the four gaps: gap 1, gap 2, gap 3, and gap 4. These gaps are also called as provider gaps. So the most important gap is considered here is the customer gap, which is gap 1. So what the customer expects from the service and what he experiences the actual service, or what is the perceived service he has seen. When there is a difference between that, it gives rise to customer gap. That is gap 1. So why there is a difference between expected and perceived service is because customer expectations are different and what the company thinks or perceives to be the customer expectations are different. So that is why there is a difference between expected service and perceived service. So when there is a difference between the actual service which the customer has received and what he expected to be the service, when there is a difference between that, it gives rise to customer gap. That is gap 1. Gap 2 arises when the company thinks these are the customer expectations and the customer driven service design and standards are not as per customer expectations. Then it gives rise to gap 2. Gap 3 arises when the service delivery is not as per the service driven, customer driven service design and standards. That means the service delivery is not as per the customer requirements, not as per the customer expectations. Then it gives rise to gap 3. Gap 4 arises when the service company has made a lot of promises about their service in their marketing communication, in their advertisements, but when it comes to the actual delivery of service, they have not kept their promises. Then it gives rise to gap 4. So when the service performance is not as per the promises, then it gives rise to gap 4. So these are the four gaps which the service organization can find out in their service organization through this diagram, the gap model, and they can determine the service quality of their company, whether they are providing high quality service or whether they are providing low quality service. If they are providing low quality service, then where in which area are they lacking? Is it in the service design and standards which is not as per the customer requirements, or is it the service delivery which is not as per the customer requirements, or is it the actual service which is not as per the customer expectations? So this gap model is a very important framework for service marketers to determine the service quality of their organizations. So, as I told you, the most critical service quality gap is the customer gap, which has to be closed by the service organizations. Then only they can achieve success in their service marketing. So, they should design the service as per the customer expectations. They should deliver the service as per the customer expectations. They should promise and deliver the service as per customer expectations. But when the customer perceives the actual service is very different from their expectations, then it gives rise to the customer gap. So, customer gap or gap 1 is not knowing what the customer expects. Gap 2 is not selecting the right service design and standards as per customer expectations. Gap 3 is not delivering the service design and standards as per customer requirements. Gap 4 is not matching the service performance to the promises they had made. So the customer gap is the critical gap when there is a difference between expected service and perceived service. So let's see what is customer expectations, customer perception, and customer needs. Customer expectations are some standards or reference points which a customer has about a service experience. So, for example, when you visit an expensive restaurant, you expect high class service. So, that is the customer expectation. So when he visits a fast food restaurant, he will expect average service or speedy service. That is their customer expectations. Customer perception is what the customer thinks of the actual service performance. So, for example, when customers go to a five-star hotel, they perceive that it will provide expensive service. But when the five-star hotel does not provide an expensive service, then it gives rise to the gap between customer expectations and customer perception. So, what he expected and what he saw or experienced actually when he went to the five-star hotel gives rise to gap 1. Customer needs. So, this is closing the gap and delivering as per the service quality. So, customer needs first, the service organization should have a clear understanding of the customer needs of their targeted customers. So, in small service organizations, the employees are always in contact with customers so they can easily come to know the customer needs. But in large service organizations, employees are usually not in direct contact with their customers. So, then it gives rise to deficiencies or the gaps in their service. So, gap 1, the reasons why gap 1 arises is the employees are not interacting directly with customers, they are not ready to ask customers what they want, or they don't have the capacity to fulfill the customer expectations. So, this results in poor service quality. So, what are the key factors responsible for gap 1? When the company has not done enough marketing research to find out the needs of their targeted customers, then they will not know what the customers expect, and this will give rise to gap 1. When the company is not focused on service quality, they are not focused on developing CRM, that is customer relationship management with their customers, then it gives rise to gap 1. When there is a lack of upward communication, that means the lower level employees who are in direct contact with customers, they are not giving feedback about the customers' opinions, ideas, or their feedback to the upper levels of management. So that is known as lack of upward communication. So when this communication does not happen, the top management has no idea what the customers want, and it will give rise to gap 1. When there is no interaction between the management and customers, and when there is no communication between them, the management and customers, it gives rise to gap 1. When the company is mainly focusing on sales, that is, achieving more transactions with their customers, they are not focusing on developing long term relationship with their customers, then it gives rise to gap 1. When the company is focusing more on getting new customers and they are not bothered about satisfying their existing customers and developing relationship with them, then also it gives rise to gap 1. So also when things go wrong in the service organization and the management does not bother to correct it, or they are not bothered to listen to customer complaints, they don't have any service recovery strategies when failure happens, then all these reasons can give rise to gap 1. So, in most service organizations today, we see that the frontline employees, they have been delegated some decision making authority. So they are empowered employees at their level, they can take certain decisions in order to satisfy customers better. Like for example, the IKEA store, they have the frontline employees who are trained well and who can take a few decisions at their end. They don't have to wait for their boss's approval, so they are able to satisfy their customers more. So, what are the traditional research methods to find out the needs of your targeted customers? The most common method is survey, where a questionnaire is given to targeted customers. Customer interviews are conducted. Complaint systems have been set up by service organizations where they collect feedback and look into the complaints given by customers. They do brainstorming. They also do the gap analysis, service quality gap analysis. All these are traditional ways of researching and finding out where your service is going wrong and what are the needs of your targeted customers. So, like for example, the IKEA store, they have designed their store and their products as per the customer's requirements. 85% of the customers rate the store as excellent, so the store has been able to close most of the gaps as they have designed their stores and designed their products all as per customers' expectations. So they have built stores in more than 20 countries. They whatever standards and design of their stores, it's all customer centric. That means as per customers requirement. And what is their service scape? That means the physical environment of their stores, both indoors and outdoors, is also designed as per customer requirements. They have a very strong employee culture. They carefully select their employees and train them well, so they are able to close the gap 3. And they also co-educate their customers through their catalogs to close gap 4. That means the service delivery is as per what they promise in their catalogs. So because of all these reasons, IKEA store has been able to close all the 4 provider gaps and achieve success in their service. Provider gap 2 is when the service quality, design, and standards is not right. It is not as per customer requirements. So the service provider should know what their customers expect and they should deliver superior quality service. They should have the right service design and standards, that is as per customer requirements. So problem arise in gap 2 when the company does not understand what are the expectations of their customers and they set up a wrong design of their service design and standards. So the reasons for gap 2 is when the service design has been done poorly, it is not as per customer requirements, the service positioning is also not as per customer requirements, when the service standards is also not as per customer requirements, the process management is also not focusing on customer needs, and the company has no formal process or procedure to maintain their service quality, and their physical evidence or servicescape or their physical environment is not suitable for the customers. That is, whatever tangibles they have created is not as per customer expectations. So, all these reasons give rise to gap 2 when the service design and standards is not as per the customer requirements. So service-scape design also is not as per the customer's needs, employee needs. There is no proper updating of their service. There is no proper maintenance of their service, and there is no proper communication about their service. As in the case of services, they are intangible, so it's difficult to describe and communicate about the service. So, like for example, how can a doctor describe his service, communicate about his service to convince his targeted customers? So, only through the testimonials of their patients who have already taken treatment under the doctor, they can come out and talk about the service which they have received. That is communication about the doctor's service. So, communicating about a service or describing a service is difficult as services are intangible. So, when introducing new services, all the employees, the frontline employees, that is those who sit at the reception, the support employees, that is behind the scenes, they are working. They all should work together as a team to implement the service. So, how do we avoid provider gap 2? To avoid gap 2, they should properly design the service. They should properly set the service standards as per customer requirements. They should use good tools like blueprint of service, which will help them to improve and design their service well. Customer contact personnel should be trained well so that they can deliver the service as per the standard set, and they should customers should not find that these standards are absent. If they find that the service does not have any standards, they will say that it is of low quality. So, like for example, Amazon is well known for their service standards, so they have successfully closed gap 2, that is, and the gap 1, that is the customer gap. Now, what is physical evidence? Physical evidence is all the physical facilities which is provided in a service. What is the equipment used? What is the signage? That is different signboards which is used. So, for example, in a restaurant, the menu, the table, the chairs, how the design of the restaurant, physical facilities are, everything will be conveying a lot to the customer regarding how the service will be. So this all physical evidence should all be designed as per customer expectations. So for example, in a restaurant, or in a hotel or maybe a theme park, health club, hospital, school, all these physical service organizations, they design their physical area or physical environment very carefully so that it is attractive to the customers, both customers and employees. So visually they make it very attractive so that it will attract the customers as well as employees to work in that organization. So designing the physical evidence or physical environment of the service is very important. It should be as per customer expectations. For example, you see the service scape of government hospitals and private hospitals. Private hospitals look very attractive. Their physical environment is made very attractive. Comparatively, you see the government hospitals, their physical environment is not at all attractive, so they are not able to attract the customers towards the government hospitals, and more people go towards the private hospitals to get good quality service. So provider gap 3, where the service design should be right. That means as per customer requirements. So if the process, if the service design, if the systems are not as per the customer requirements, then it gives rise to gap 3. So when the customer driven standards, that means what the customer expects the service standards to be, and the actual service is very different, which is being delivered by employees, then it gives rise to gap 3. So what are the reasons for gap 3? Their HR policies are not good of the service organizations. Their recruitment is not effective. They are not recruiting talented employees. Whatever roles they are giving to their employees is not clear. There is no proper match between the technology that is applied and the employees. There is no proper match between the employees and the technology used. That means the equipment or whatever they are using, technology that is not according to employee requirements. When the employees are not compensated well, when there is no proper performance measurement of employees, there is no proper evaluation of employees, then it gives rise to gap 3. When there is no encouragement given to employees, no motivation given to employees, too much control is put on employees, and employees are not empowered. That means they are not given some decision making powers. It's all centrally controlled by the top management. Then it gives rise to gap 3. So when the customers do not carry out their roles properly, they don't have any knowledge about what their role is and what their responsibilities is, then it gives rise to gap 3. That means if the patient is not cooperating with the doctor, that means how can the doctor give a proper service to the patient? So customer has to fulfill their roles. If the client is not sharing truthfully all the information with the lawyers or with the consultant, then how can the consultant or lawyer provide proper service to the customers? So customers also have to have knowledge about what is their role and what is their responsibilities. They can also affect the outcome of the service. They can also affect the quality of service which is given to the customers. So when there is a problem with the service agents, that is intermediaries, they are not providing the service properly. Like for example, in restaurants, You have agents who do the delivery of service to different homes. So if they are not doing their delivery properly, then it gives rise to gap 3. When there is no proper mechanism in the service organization to control quality of their service, to maintain or keep their service quality consistent, then also it gives rise to gap 3. When there is no proper match between the supply and demand, there is no way to meet the fluctuations in demand, then also it gives rise to gap 3. So, like for example, in a restaurant, if there is a sudden flood of customers coming to the restaurant and the restaurant is not able to handle all the customers at the same time, then it gives rise to gap 3. And when the mix of customers is not correct, then also it gives rise to gap 3. So all these are reasons which can give rise to gap 3. So what is the factors that cause gap 3? Gap 3 arises because of employees. Employees do not understand their roles, they do not understand their goals, they are not understanding the customer needs, they are always in conflict between customers and the management. The employees have not been properly recruited, talented employees have not been selected, technology which is being used in the service organization is outdated or it is inadequate. There is not much compensation and recognition given to employees. That means employees are not paid well and they are not recognized also for their hard work. When the employees do not receive any empowerment and there is no teamwork among the employees, then also these factors can give rise to gap 3. So all these factors which we talked about in gap 3 is relating to HR function. So how HR does their recruitment, how they train the employees, how they collect feedback from customers, how they design their jobs, how they motivate the employees, what is their organizational structure, all this will determine whether the gap 3 arises or not. So customers also here should know how to perform their role. So employees, it's not only employees, it is customers also who should perform their role, who should provide all the information required to the providers. They should be knowing what is their responsibilities, then only the service quality will be good. Otherwise, the service quality will be poor and customers can negatively influence each other, like for example other customers in a restaurant. If one customer complains about the food, the other customers also get affected and they start finding some fault with the food that they have ordered. So this affects the service quality and it will give rise to gap 3, that is the delivery of service is not as per the customer expectations. Provider gap 4 is when the service performance is not matching to what the company had promised. So this is because the service delivery is not as per what the company had promised in their external communication. That is in their marketing communication, through their advertisements, through their sales force, they had made lot of promises about their services. But when the service delivery happens, it is not as per the promise that they had made. So it gives rise to gap 4. So because of gap 4, it can lead to customer gap, where the service perceived is not as per customer expectations. So, what are the factors that lead to provider gap 4? When the service marketing communication is not proper, that is, whatever promises they make, they are not able to deliver that. So, because when the company has not first not marketed their service internally to the customers well, the employees well. That means they have not trained their employees well to deliver the service as per their promise. Then it gives rise to gap 4. When the management of employees is not done properly, it is not as per customer expectations, and when the company has overpromised, it has promised too much in their advertisements and in their personal selling, then also it gives rise to gap 4. When there is not much horizontal communication among the employees, there is not much communication, there is not much communication between the sales department and the production department. When all most of the service organizations, they do not educate their customers about their roles and responsibilities, how the service should be utilized by the customers, then also it gives rise to gap 4. When the company has not properly managed their interactive marketing, that is how the employees communicate with the customers. And if they have not properly trained their contact people, contact employees, and customers, it gives rise to problems in the gap 4. So employees who do not understand the service, they have not been trained well. So they such kind of employees will deliver poor quality service. So there should be proper coordination among the employees. There should be proper teamwork. On the employee should know what are the promises made in their marketing communication, and according to that they should deliver their service, then it will close gap 4. Pricing of service is also difficult because services is intangible, and also the service production and consumption happens at the same time. So pricing of service is difficult. So that is not easy. It's more complicated calculating the price of service when compared to tangible goods. So by closing all these gaps, the service organization can improve their service quality. They should focus on the targeted customers. They should do market research to find out the needs of their targeted customers. Then they will be able to close all the customer gaps and provide high quality service to their customers. So, blueprint is a tool which is used by the service organization. It is a map or it is a process which shows all the steps of the service. So, it's like a visual display of the service. It shows how the service is delivered, how the process happens, where the customer comes in contact with the employees, that is, customer contact points. It also shows what is the role of customers and what is the role of employees. So this blue print is a very important tool for the service organizations to understand how to deliver the service, how many steps should be there, what should be the role of their employees, what should be the role of their customers. So this blueprint technique is used by in various industries like industrial engineering, logistics, computer system analysis. So it is a very useful tool which can be used by service organizations to visually map out the process of their service.